The funeral hall was shrouded in an oppressive quiet, broken only by the occasional shuffle of feet or muffled sobs. The air seemed heavy, laden with grief that pressed on the mourners like a physical weight. Among the sea of sorrowful faces was a young boy, Ethan, standing slightly apart from the adults. His dark eyes, sharp and probing, observed the room with a maturity far beyond his years. As the ceremony progressed, Ethan approached the casket. The room grew still, all eyes fixed on the small figure moving with a hesitance that betrayed his age. Reaching the casket, he stopped. The silence grew thicker until his voice cut through, clear and unwavering. "My dad is still alive." Gasps rippled through the crowd, breaking the fragile composure of the mourners. Whispers followed, a wave of confusion and disbelief. Some dismissed Ethan's words as the naive fantasy of a grieving child, but others exchanged uneasy glances, their skepticism tinged with uncertainty. In a shadowed corner of the room stood Detective Nathan Cole, a man in his mid-40s with years of experience untangling life's most perplexing mysteries. Once a close friend of Ethan's father, Daniel, Nathan had found Daniel's sudden death unsettling. The closed casket, the secrecy surrounding the cause of death, none of it sat right with him. And now Ethan's startling declaration ignited a spark in the detective's mind. Nathan watched as Ethan's mother, Clara, stood rigid near the casket. Her face, etched with sorrow, carried a flicker of something else, fear, perhaps, or guilt. Taking a deep breath, Nathan approached her. "Clara," he began gently, "can we talk for a moment?" Clara's gaze flickered, narrowing slightly as if gauging his intent. Finally, with a reluctant nod, she gestured toward a side room. Once inside, Nathan wasted no time. "I'm sorry to intrude, but there are questions about Daniel's death that I can't ignore." And now, with what Ethan just said, Clara's face hardened. "There's nothing to investigate," she said firmly. "Daniel is gone. Let us grieve in peace." But Nathan's instincts told him otherwise. As he left the room, his resolve only deepened. Something wasn't right, and he would not rest until he uncovered the truth. The next morning, Nathan sat in the sterile confines of the records office, the faint hum of fluorescent lights overhead mirroring the buzzing in his mind. His badge had granted him access to Daniel's death certificate, but when he requested the document, the clerk offered only an apologetic shrug. "I'm sorry, Detective. It appears the file is missing. Likely a clerical error." Nathan's jaw tightened. In his experience, clerical errors were rarely innocent in cases like this. Missing records often meant someone didn't want the truth uncovered. Frustrated but undeterred, Nathan decided his next step. He would revisit Clara, this time unannounced, and see if Ethan could shed more light on what he had seen. The morning sun was pale and weak as Nathan arrived at Clara's home. When she answered the door, her guarded expression told him she wasn't thrilled to see him. "What now, Detective?" she asked, her tone clipped. "I need to speak with Ethan." Nathan replied, keeping his voice calm. "There are some details I need to clarify." Clara hesitated, her hand tightening on the doorframe. "He's just a child," she said, her voice softening slightly. "He doesn't know what he's saying." "Maybe not," Nathan conceded, "but children often notice things we overlook. Please, Clara, this could be important." Reluctantly, Clara stepped aside and called for Ethan. The boy appeared moments later, his wide eyes darting between his mother and the detective. Nathan crouched to meet him at eye level, his tone gentle but firm. "Ethan," he began, "yesterday you said your dad is still alive. Can you tell me why you think that?" Ethan looked thoughtful, his small hands fidgeting with a toy car he carried. "Because I saw him," he said simply. Nathan's pulse quickened. "You saw him? Where?" "At the park," Ethan replied with conviction. "He was standing by the trees, watching me. I waved, but he didn't wave back. Then he walked away." Nathan pressed further. "And you're sure it was your dad?" Ethan nodded solemnly. "It was him. I saw him again at the mall. He looked at me, but didn't come over." Clara's voice broke through, trembling but firm. Ethan, we talked about this. Daddy's gone. Ethan looked up at her, his expression unyielding. I know it was him, Mommy. Nathan stood, his mind racing. Ethan's testimony was far from definitive evidence, but the boy's unwavering certainty couldn't be ignored. Whatever Ethan had seen, or thought he had seen, deserved investigation. I'll check them all, Nathan said, turning to Clara. If there's anything to this, I need to know. Clara didn't respond. Her arms crossed tightly as if bracing herself against an unseen storm. Ethan, however, looked up at Nathan with a flicker of hope. Will you find him? The boy asked softly. Nathan met his gaze, a solemn promise in his eyes. I'll do my best. The mall buzzed with its usual weekend life, a mix of hurried shoppers, laughing children, and the background hum of idle chatter. Nathan stepped through the sliding doors, his sharp eyes scanning the throng. Ethan's account of seeing his father had been detailed, and Nathan clung to the boy's certainty as he made his way toward the fountain Ethan had described. The fountain stood at the mall's center, its cascading water sparkling under the overhead lights. Nathan lingered, observing the ebb and flow of people. At first, nothing stood out, just an endless parade of strangers. But then, near a bookstore across the way, his gaze settled on a man. The figure was tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed simply in a dark jacket and jeans. His casual attire blended easily into the crowd, but something about his movement caught Nathan's attention. There was a familiarity in his stride, a rhythm and confidence that sent a chill racing down the detective's spine. Nathan followed the man at a safe distance, weaving through the crowd as discreetly as his years of training allowed. The man stopped briefly at a coffee shop, ordering a drink before continuing toward the mall exit. Nathan quickened his pace, trailing him outside into the brisk afternoon air. The man headed to the parking lot, his gait deliberate, his head turning just enough to scan his surroundings without appearing obvious. When he reached a modest gray sedan, he paused, glancing around as if sensing he was being watched. Nathan ducked behind a nearby vehicle, his heart pounding as he carefully noted the license plate. The man climbed into the car and drove away, his movements precise and calculated. Nathan hurried back to his own vehicle, determined to follow. The drive was quiet, the man taking a direct route to a residential neighborhood on the city's outskirts. Nathan parked a few houses down and watched as the man entered a modest, well-kept home. For a moment, Nathan hesitated. This could be anyone, a stranger, a man who coincidentally resembled Daniel. But deep down, he knew better. The resemblance was uncanny, and the man's cautious behavior didn't fit that of someone with nothing to hide. Nathan jotted down the address and leaned back in his seat, his thoughts racing. If this was Daniel, or someone connected to him, why was he here, hiding? And why hadn't he come forward to his family? Questions buzzed in Nathan's mind as he started the car and drove away. He needed answers, and he was willing to dig deeper, no matter how tangled this mystery became. The morning sun was rising as Nathan parked in front of the precinct. The address and license plate he'd collected led him to a man named Caleb Reed. The records were sparse, almost suspiciously clean, with no significant history or ties to anyone named Daniel or Ethan. But one thing stood out. Caleb Reed's appearance, from his height to his distinctive gait, was a mirror image of Daniel's. Nathan couldn't shake the possibility this man might be Daniel. Or, more intriguingly, he might be someone closer than a stranger, a twin. Determined to uncover the truth, Nathan reached out to Caleb later that day. Standing outside Caleb's modest home, he knocked firmly on the door. It swung open moments later, revealing the man from the mall. Up close, the resemblance to Daniel was startling, so much so that Nathan had to suppress a gasp. Detective Nathan Cole, he introduced himself, holding up his badge. I'd like to ask you a few questions. Caleb's expression tightened, his posture guarded. What's this about? He asked cautiously. Do you know a man named Daniel Porter? Nathan asked directly, watching for any reaction. For a moment, Caleb's face was unreadable. Then he shook his head. I don't know anyone by that name. Nathan held his ground. You look exactly like him. A twin, maybe? Caleb's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing. You've got the wrong guy, he said firmly. Nathan leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. We can confirm this with a DNA test. If you've got nothing to hide, you won't mind cooperating. For the first time, Caleb faltered. His hands clenched at his sides, and his gaze darted briefly toward the ground. Fine, he muttered. Do your test. Later that evening, Nathan returned to the precinct with Caleb's DNA sample. The results arrived faster than expected, and what they revealed left Nathan momentarily breathless. Caleb Reed and Daniel Porter were a genetic match. They weren't just lookalikes, they were twins. Nathan immediately contacted Clara, requesting a meeting at the station. When she arrived, her face was pale, her eyes wide with unease. Sitting across from her, Nathan slid the file over. Daniel had a twin, he said quietly. Clara's hand trembled as she picked up the file, her eyes scanning the results. This doesn't make sense, she whispered. Daniel never mentioned a twin. He would have told me. Nathan leaned forward, his tone steady but firm. It's possible he didn't know. Caleb says he was adopted and has no knowledge of his birth family. But this changes everything. Clara's breath hitched, tears welling in her eyes. Why would someone separate them? And why didn't we know? That's what I intend to find out, Nathan said resolutely. I've asked Caleb to meet with us. I think it's important that you and Ethan are there too. Clara hesitated, her protective instincts flaring. Ethan's been through enough. Nathan met her gaze, unwavering. He deserves to know the truth, and Caleb might have answers we don't. Finally, Clara nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. We'll come. The next day, the station's interrogation room felt suffocating as Caleb faced Clara and Ethan for the first time. Ethan's small voice broke the silence, his words filled with awe and curiosity. You look like my dad. Caleb's hardened exterior cracked, his eyes softening. I don't know how, he admitted, his voice heavy with emotion. I didn't even know I had a brother. Nathan observed the exchange, his mind churning. The revelation of Caleb and Daniel's connection was monumental, but it raised more questions than it answered. Why had they been separated, and what role did this secret play in Daniel's supposed death? We need to dig deeper, Nathan said, breaking the silence. Someone went to great lengths to keep this hidden. I think the truth lies in Daniel's past and the circumstances of his death. The room was silent, the weight of his words pressing down on everyone. Caleb finally nodded, determination sparking in his eyes. Let's find out, he said. The search for answers began in earnest the following morning. Nathan, Clara, and Caleb sifted through every piece of information they could find about Daniel's past. Old photographs, letters, and medical records painted a fragmented picture of his life before Clara and Ethan. But none of it hinted at the existence of a twin. Nathan decided to take a different approach. If Caleb had been adopted, there had to be records somewhere. By digging into adoption archives and cross-referencing them with Caleb's limited personal documents, Nathan uncovered the name of the agency that had placed Caleb in foster care. A long-defunct organization, the agency's remaining files were stored in a government archive. Nathan's persistence paid off when he found Caleb's adoption record. Buried among faded documents was a single line that made his heart race. Birth mother, Marianne Porter, surrendered twin boys for adoption at birth. He called Caleb and Clara immediately. They met at Nathan's office that afternoon, the weight of anticipation hanging heavily between them. Nathan laid the document on the table, his voice calm but charged with significance. Caleb, he said, your birth mother's name was Marianne Porter. She gave birth to twin boys, one of whom was Daniel. Caleb's face was a mix of shock and anger. Why didn't anyone tell me? Why was I given away? Clara, seated beside him, placed a tentative hand on his arm. Daniel never knew about you either, she said softly. We're just as blindsided as you are. Nathan leaned forward. This goes deeper than just the adoption. Someone worked hard to keep you two apart. The question is why. As Nathan continued his investigation, he focused on the circumstances surrounding Daniel's death. The missing death certificate and the closed casket pointed to foul play. Nathan tracked down Dr. Harris, the coroner listed on the funeral documents, and requested an interview. When Nathan arrived at the coroner's office, he found Dr. Harris visibly uneasy. The older man fidgeted as Nathan introduced himself. Dr. Harris, Nathan began, I'm looking into the death of Daniel Porter. His death certificate is missing, and there are irregularities in how his case was handled. The coroner's face paled and his voice wavered as he replied, Detective, I was instructed to follow strict orders. I didn't ask questions. Orders from whom? Nathan pressed. Dr. Harris hesitated, his eyes darting toward the door as if considering an escape. I can't say, he stammered. But it wasn't an accident. That's all I can tell you. Nathan's jaw tightened. This isn't just about you, Doctor. A family deserves answers, and I intend to get them. If you're hiding something, it will come out eventually. Dr. Harris exhaled shakily. There were men, official-looking. They came with paperwork and told me the case was confidential. They took the body after I signed off. Nathan returned to the precinct with more questions than answers. He relayed the conversation to Clara and Caleb, who were waiting anxiously for news. Clara's face darkened as Nathan shared the details. Why would someone want Daniel's body taken? She asked, her voice trembling. And who were those men? Nathan shook his head. I don't know yet, but it's clear that Daniel's death wasn't natural, and someone wanted it covered up. Do you think he's alive? Caleb asked suddenly, his voice filled with a mixture of hope and disbelief. Nathan hesitated. I don't know, he admitted, but if he is, we'll find him. As the room fell into heavy silence, Ethan, who had been quietly listening, spoke up. I saw him, he said softly, his voice unwavering. I know it was him. Nathan exchanged a glance with Clara and Caleb. Ethan's certainty couldn't be ignored. Whoever was behind this had underestimated the resolve of a boy who refused to let go of his father, and a family determined to uncover the truth. The revelation that Daniel's death wasn't natural weighed heavily on Nathan's mind as he stood outside the quiet neighborhood where Caleb had been living. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to take shape, but they still didn't fit together. If Daniel was alive, why hadn't he come forward? And who were the men who orchestrated the cover-up? Nathan's next step was clear. Track the chain of custody for Daniel's remains. He secured a warrant to access archived hospital records and found a glaring discrepancy. Daniel's body had been transferred not to a funeral home, but to a private facility owned by a company called Horizon Biotech. The name sent a chill down Nathan's spine. Horizon Biotech had long been rumored to conduct unethical experiments, operating in the murky space between legality and shadowy corporate dealings. If Horizon was involved, Daniel's death or disappearance might have been part of something far more sinister. Later that evening, Nathan sat with Caleb and Clara, the file from Horizon spread across the table. Caleb's hands clenched into fists as he scanned the documents. They took him there? He asked, his voice tight with anger. Why? Clara's voice broke, trembling with fear. What could they possibly want with Daniel? Nathan's expression was grim. Horizon's known for its work in genetics. If they knew Daniel and Caleb were twins, they might have seen Daniel as valuable. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Caleb's face darkened, his anger simmering just beneath the surface. So they just took him? Like he was some lab rat? Nathan met Caleb's eyes, his tone resolute. If Daniel is alive, Horizon might have him. We need to find out. The next day, Nathan drove to Horizon's facility, a sprawling complex surrounded by high fences and security cameras. Getting inside legally would require a mountain of red tape, so Nathan opted for discretion. Under the cover of night, he scaled a fence and slipped onto the property. Moving through the shadows, he found his way to a side entrance. The door was locked, but a combination of skill and a small toolkit allowed Nathan to bypass the mechanism. Inside, the building was eerily silent, its long, sterile hallways lit by a dim, flickering light. Nathan's search eventually led him to a restricted section marked Research Wing. As he moved deeper, he came across a lab filled with medical equipment and files. One folder, labeled Subject 21, caught his attention. Inside were detailed reports and photographs of Daniel. Nathan's stomach turned as he scanned the documents. Horizon hadn't just taken Daniel, they'd been experimenting on him. The files detailed procedures to stimulate dormant genetic traits, CAS, with Daniel identified as a key subject due to his unique DNA. A noise behind him broke Nathan's focus. He turned to see a man in a lab coat standing in the doorway, his face pale with fear. "Who are you?" the man demanded. "I'm a detective," Nathan said, stepping forward. "And you're going to tell me where Daniel Porter is." The man hesitated, his eyes darting to the hallway. "I don't know everything," he said quickly. "I just processed the data. But I know they moved him 2 weeks ago to another facility." "Where?" Nathan pressed. The man shook his head. "I don't know. They keep those details from us. Please, I can't." Before he could finish, the sound of heavy boots echoed down the hallway. Security had been alerted. Nathan grabbed the file and bolted, slipping out a back exit just as the guards arrived. Back at the precinct, Nathan spread the stolen documents across his desk. He shared what he'd found with Caleb and Clara, their faces a mixture of shock and horror. "They experimented on him?" Clara whispered, tears streaming down her face. "My God, why?" Nathan looked at her, his voice steady but grim. "Because someone saw an opportunity. But we're going to stop them." Caleb's jaw tightened, his resolve hardening. "We need to find him." Nathan nodded, "And we will. They can't hide forever." As the clock ticked toward dawn, Nathan's mind raced. Horizon's actions hinted at a conspiracy far larger than he'd anticipated. But no matter how powerful the forces behind it were, Nathan knew one thing: the truth was within reach. The first light of dawn cast a faint glow over the precinct as Nathan pieced together the fragmented story. Daniel wasn't just the victim of a tragic death. He had been taken, used, and hidden by people who viewed him as a tool rather than a man. But why? What was it about Daniel, or perhaps his genetic link to Caleb, that made him so valuable? Nathan's thoughts were interrupted by a call from an unknown number. He answered, his tone cautious. "You've been asking too many questions," a cold voice said. "If you value your life and the lives of Daniel's family, you'll stop now." Nathan gripped the phone tightly. "Who is this? Where's Daniel?" The voice chuckled darkly. "This isn't a game, detective. Walk away." The line went dead, but the call only fueled Nathan's determination. Whoever was behind this had underestimated his resolve and the strength of the family fighting alongside him. Hours later, Nathan received a breakthrough. A contact in law enforcement who had been monitoring Horizon Biotech provided him with the location of an off-the-books facility in the countryside. It was heavily guarded and isolated, exactly the kind of place that would house someone like Daniel. Nathan didn't go alone. Caleb insisted on joining him, his desperation to find his brother overriding any concerns for his safety. Clara remained behind with Ethan, her maternal instincts telling her to protect her son above all else. As Nathan and Caleb approached the facility, the air was thick with tension. The two men parked a distance away, moving stealthily through the dense trees that surrounded the compound. Caleb's face was set in a mask of grim determination, while Nathan's mind raced with contingency plans. The facility was fortified, but Nathan had anticipated this. Using the information from his contact, he bypassed the security system, leading Caleb through a side entrance. Inside, the halls were cold and sterile, the sound of their footsteps muffled by the polished floors. They found Daniel in a small room at the end of a dimly lit corridor. He was seated on a cot, his head bowed, his figure gaunt but unmistakably alive. Caleb froze, his breath catching in his throat. "Daniel," he whispered. Daniel looked up, his eyes dull with exhaustion. But as they met Caleb's, a flicker of recognition sparked. "Caleb?" His voice was hoarse, but the name carried a mix of disbelief and hope. Caleb rushed forward, pulling his brother into a tight embrace. "It's me. I'm here." Nathan kept watch at the door, his focus split between the emotional reunion and the threat of discovery. "We need to move," he said sharply. "This place won't stay quiet for long." Daniel, though weak, nodded. "They'll come for me. They won't let me go." "They'll have to go through us first," Caleb said firmly, helping his brother to his feet. The trio navigated their way back through the facility, but just as they reached the exit, alarms blared. Security guards poured into the hallway, their shouts echoing off the walls. Nathan drew his gun, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Stay behind me." A tense standoff ensued, but Nathan's experience gave them the edge. Through a combination of quick thinking and strategic movement, they managed to evade the guards and slip into the surrounding forest. By the time they reached safety, the sun was setting. Nathan, Caleb, and Daniel sat in a secluded clearing, catching their breath. Daniel's voice was weak but steady as he recounted his ordeal. "They wanted to unlock something in my DNA," he explained. "They said it was unique. I don't know what they were looking for, but they thought I was the key." Nathan's jaw tightened. "And Caleb? Did they know about him?" Daniel nodded. "They found out later. They were going to take him too. That's why I stayed quiet. I didn't want them to hurt him." Caleb's expression darkened, guilt and anger warring in his eyes. "You should have told someone. We could have helped." "I couldn't risk it," Daniel said softly. "Not with Ethan and Clara. I couldn't let them be dragged into this." Nathan placed a reassuring hand on Daniel's shoulder. "You don't have to run anymore. We'll protect you, and we'll expose whoever did this." In the weeks that followed, Nathan's investigation led to the downfall of Horizon Biotech. With Daniel's testimony and the stolen files as evidence, the shadowy organization's unethical practices were brought to light. Daniel reunited with his family, though the scars of his ordeal would take time to heal. Caleb, once an isolated man with no sense of belonging, found himself a part of something greater, a family he never knew he had. For Ethan, the return of his father was nothing short of a miracle. His unwavering belief in Daniel's survival had sparked the journey that brought them all back together. And for Clara, the truth, though painful, gave her the closure she desperately needed. As for Nathan, the case was a reminder of why he became a detective, to uncover the truth, no matter how deeply it was buried, and to fight for justice, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. The Porter family was whole again, and the shadows of the past began to fade. But the memory of their journey, the strength it took to find each other, would remain forever. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe so you won't miss any of our latest videos. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them below. Thank you all for taking the time to watch, and see you in the next video.